December 17, 1968. Atlanta, Georgia. For most people, it was just another cold winter morning, but for Barbara Mackle and her family, this day would mark the beginning of an unimaginable nightmare. 19-year-old Barbara Mackle was a student at Emory University. She was bright, full of promise, and, like many young people her age, excited about her future. That morning, she was staying at a small motel with her mother, Jane Mackle, to recover from a recent bout of the flu. They were in the quiet comfort of their room, trying to escape the chaos of the world outside. But little did they know that danger was already closing in. It started with a knock on the door. A knock that would change their lives forever. Two figures stood on the other side. One of them wore a police uniform. The other was unremarkable at first glance, a man carrying a gun. What followed was swift and brutal. The woman, posing as an officer, claimed they needed to search the room. Before either Barbara or her mother could react, the man pulled out his weapon. There was no warning, no time to think. Within moments, Barbara was dragged out of the motel room. Jane tried to resist, but it was futile. Her daughter was gone, leaving her frantic, helpless, and trapped in a situation no mother should ever face. Soon after, the first sign of what was to come arrived, a ransom note. The kidnappers demanded $500,000, a staggering sum in 1968. The message was chilling, but there was something even more disturbing about it. The kidnappers didn't just want money. They had plans for Barbara, and what they intended to do next defied everything anyone could imagine. As the FBI was called in and the investigation began, one chilling fact emerged: Barbara had not been taken to some far-off hideout or secluded cabin. She was hidden somewhere much more terrifying. Somewhere that no one could have expected. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth. The kidnappers had buried Barbara alive. Her only company was the silence of the dark, the weight of the dirt pressing down above her, and the fading sound of the world above ground. She was sealed inside a wooden box, trapped in total darkness, with no way to escape. Time was running out. Her breath was growing shorter, and every moment she spent underground brought her closer to the brink. But how could this young woman possibly survive such an ordeal? How could anyone endure the suffocating darkness, the isolation, the terror of being buried alive? The FBI scrambled into action, racing against the clock. Agents followed every lead, hoping to find any trace of where Barbara might be. They searched the city, interrogated witnesses, and combed through countless false leads. The pressure was mounting. As hours turned into days, hope began to slip away. The kidnappers had given no indication of where they had taken Barbara. The search was exhaustive, but as time passed, the chances of finding her alive seemed slimmer with every passing moment. But the real question was, could they even find her in time? And more importantly, could she survive this unimaginable ordeal? Barbara Mackle's fate now hung by a thread. The country watched, held its breath, as the FBI pushed forward, determined to save her. But every minute that passed felt like a lifetime, and with each passing second, the chances of finding her alive seemed to slip further into the distance. How did a young woman survive being buried alive for over 3 days? How did she endure the unthinkable, when the odds were stacked so overwhelmingly against her? The answer to that question would soon shock the world, but it all started with a single knock on a motel door, and the mysterious men who took everything from her. December 17, 1968. Barbara Mackle lay weak in a quiet motel room in Decatur, Georgia. Fever burned through her body, leaving her skin clammy, her thoughts sluggish. She had come here with her mother, Jane Mackle, for one simple reason: rest. But outside, unseen, someone was waiting. Watching. The motel was silent. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional flicker of headlights sweeping past the window, nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. The world moved on, unaware that, within moments, everything for the Mackle family was about to change. A knock at the door. Sharp. 3 raps. Jane stirred, glancing toward the sound. Barbara barely moved, lost in the fever's grip. Another knock, harder this time. Then, a voice, calm, authoritative. "Police. Open up." Jane's pulse quickened. She hesitated. "There's been an accident. Stuart Woodward, your daughter's friend, he's at the hospital. We need to speak with Barbara." Barbara's fevered mind grasped at the words. Stuart? An accident? Her thoughts were slow, unfocused. Jane, concerned but still uncertain, rose and unlocked the door. It happened in an instant. The door burst open, slammed inward by force. 2 figures rushed inside. One held a gun. The other moved with practiced precision. Jane gasped, but a hand clamped over her mouth. A muffled struggle. Barbara, weak, barely had time to react before she was yanked upright, her body too frail to resist. A rough cloth pressed over her face. The last thing she saw was a shadowed figure looming above her before a bag was pulled over her head. Darkness. Cold metal against her side. A voice, low and firm, whispered close to her ear. "Don't fight. Stay quiet." They had her now. And there was no way out. The late 1960s had seen a rise in high-profile kidnappings. Criminals targeting the wealthy, the powerful, those who could afford to pay for their loved ones. But this? This was different. This was precise. Every move had been planned, every second accounted for. Barbara Mackle was no random victim. They had chosen her. They had waited for this moment. And now, they had her exactly where they wanted her. Time blurred inside the suffocating darkness of the bag. Barbara's breathing was shallow, each inhale tasting of stale cloth and fear. The air inside was thick, her heart pounding so loudly she swore they could hear it. She tried to steady herself, to push away the dizziness, but the fever, the fear, it was too much. Rough hands dragged her forward. The floor shifted beneath her, carpet, then something harder. A hallway? Footsteps echoed. Muffled sounds, distant voices. A door creaked open, then slammed shut, cutting off the world she had known just moments ago. Movement. She was being carried now. The strain of bodies lifting her, adjusting her weight. The scent of sweat, of earth, of something metallic filled her nostrils. A vehicle door groaned open. She was hoisted inside. A jolt. The vehicle rumbled to life. The sound of tires crunching gravel, then pavement. The vibration sent a fresh wave of nausea through her fevered body. She tried to track the turns, the stops, anything that might help her understand where she was being taken. But it was impossible. The fever blurred the edges of reality. All she could do was exist in this moment, bound, blindfolded, helpless. Time stretched. Minutes? Hours? She had no way of knowing. The sound of traffic faded. The road beneath them grew rougher. A shift in temperature. The air was colder now. Damp. Then, another stop. The engine died. Silence. The door opened. Hands grabbed her again, pulling her roughly from the vehicle. Her feet stumbled against uneven ground, grass. Dirt. The smell of wet earth filled her nostrils. A sharp voice cut through the night. Move. Barbara was pushed forward. Her legs wobbled, barely holding her weight. The fever sapped her strength, but the hands on her arms kept her upright. She felt herself being led, slowly, deliberately. Then, the ground sloped downward. Steps. Wooden, creaking beneath their weight. They were going underground. A chill ran through her. A metallic clang. A door opening? The air grew even colder. Then, nothing. Just the sound of breathing. Hers. Theirs. A hand pressed against the small of her back. Get in. She hesitated. But hesitation wasn't an option. A forceful shove sent her forward. Her hands scraped against something solid. A box? No. A coffin. A scream ripped from her throat, but it was swallowed by the night. There was no one to hear. No one to help. The lid slammed shut. A deafening silence followed. Only the sound of her own ragged breaths. Then, something shifted above her. A dull scraping sound. Dirt. Being shoveled. Piling on top. The weight of it pressing down. The realization hit like ice in her veins. She was being buried alive. Barbara clawed at the wooden walls, fingers scraping against the cold surface. Panic surged through her, her fevered body shaking with desperation. She thrashed, kicked, but there was nowhere to go. The space was too small, the air already thinning. Above her, the scraping continued. More dirt. More weight. More finality. Terror gripped her. Every breath felt shallower, the air inside turning stale. Her own heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out every other sound. Was this how it would end? Trapped beneath the earth, her screams muffled by 6 feet of soil. She forced herself to breathe slower. To think. There had to be a way out. There had to be something. Her hands brushed against something. A tube. Plastic. Running up toward the surface. Air. They had left her air. But why? What did they want? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the suffocating darkness. Trying to ignore the weight above her. Trying to understand. Somewhere, far above, the world continued. Cars drove by. Lights flickered in windows. People laughed, ate dinner, went to bed, completely unaware that beneath their feet, a girl lay in a box, trapped between life and death. And somewhere, not too far away, the people who put her here were waiting. Darkness. Silence. The world above had disappeared, replaced by the suffocating stillness of the earth. Barbara Murray lay motionless inside the fiberglass box, her breathing shallow, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The walls pressed in, close enough that she could barely move. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against the cool, smooth surface above her. The air smelled of damp earth and plastic. A small battery-powered light cast a weak, yellow glow, barely pushing back the dark. In the flickering dimness, she could see the few things her captors had left her: a bottle of water, drugged, she was sure, a small tube to breathe through, and little else. The scent of metal and chemicals lingered in the air, a reminder of the horrors slowly unfolding. She tried to steady her breath, to fight the rising panic. But the walls felt like they were closing in. The fiberglass walls of the coffin creaked with every small movement, amplifying the growing sense of entrapment. Barbara tried to focus on one thing, anything, that could ground her. The sound of her breath, the pulse of her heart, the flicker of the small light above her. But it was all becoming distorted, swallowed by the confines of the small box. Above her, the muffled sound of shovels scraping dirt. More weight pressing down. More distance between her and the surface. With every passing moment, the outside world slipped further away. She wasn't just trapped. She was buried. Barbara squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold on to something, anything, that would keep her from falling into terror. Her mother's voice. The memory of home. The scent of salt in the Florida air. But the darkness swallowed everything. Every thought she tried to cling to, every flicker of hope, was drowned by the reality of her situation. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time had no meaning here. The fiberglass walls absorbed sound, leaving her alone with her own breath, her own fear. The tiny air vent seemed to mock her, its breath was barely a whisper, yet it was her only connection to the outside world. Then, movement. A rustling from above. A voice, muffled, distant. A voice that wasn't hers, but it seemed to resonate inside her chest, deep into her bones. Don't try anything. Stay calm. If you do what you're told, you'll live. Live. The word twisted in her mind. Was this living? Sealed inside a box, deep beneath the ground? The thought alone nearly broke her. The voice faded. Then, silence again. Barbara pressed a shaking hand against the ceiling. It didn't move. Her breath hitched. The air inside was limited. If she panicked, if she breathed too fast, it would run out even sooner. She forced herself to take shallow breaths, but her throat burned. The fever from before still clung to her, making her weak, making her limbs feel like they didn't belong to her. She reached for the water bottle, hesitated, then took a careful sip. The taste was strange, chemical, almost metallic. Sedatives. They wanted her weak. Too weak to fight. Too weak to scream. She pressed her forehead against the fiberglass. Cold. Unforgiving. The edges of the box seemed to close in further with each passing minute. Each breath she took, each second spent in that dark, confined space, pushed her closer to a breaking point. The claustrophobia began to gnaw at her, deeper and deeper. Every time she closed her eyes, the images of her past, her family, her friends, the life she once knew, faded. Only the dark and the dampness remained. Somewhere above, the world continued on. People walked the streets. Cars passed. Life moved forward. And no one, not a single person, knew she was down here. Hours passed. Maybe a day. Her breathing grew shallower. The air was changing. Stale. Heavy. The walls seemed closer now, pressing against her chest, making it harder to inhale. The quiet was maddening. No sounds from above. No voices. Just her, alone in the suffocating dark. Would they come back? Or was this her grave? The note arrived at dawn. A simple, typewritten message. No emotion. No hesitation. Just a demand. $500,000. In cash. Delivered as instructed. Or she dies. The Mackle family was wealthy, one of the wealthiest in Florida. And the kidnappers knew it. They weren't just taking a girl. They were taking a fortune. But money wasn't the only thing at stake. Time was slipping away. Every moment wasted was a breath stolen from Barbara's fragile lungs. The FBI descended on the case. Agents examined the note, searching for clues, for anything that would lead them to the men responsible. The hours passed, tense and filled with uncertainty. Each moment felt like an eternity for Jane Mackle, who clutched the note with shaking hands, her mind racing with images of her daughter alone, in the dark, fighting for every breath. Press conferences. News reports. Headlines screamed across the country. Millionaire's daughter kidnapped. The callousness of the kidnappers was matched only by the urgency with which the FBI worked. Their focus was razor-sharp. The clock was ticking, every second bringing them closer to a terrible reality. There was no time to waste. The kidnappers had planned this meticulously. No fingerprints. No clues. Just a ransom demand and the promise of death if they didn't comply. The tension grew. Everyone felt the pressure. The FBI agents combed through the note, checking for any misstep. But there was nothing. No mistake. The criminals knew what they were doing. Every step they took was calculated, every decision cold and deliberate. A drop was arranged. The money prepared. But something went wrong. The first attempt failed. The kidnappers had warned against police involvement, but the FBI had been watching. Somewhere, somehow, they had been seen. And just like that, the deal was off. Barbara was still underground. The clock was ticking, but now, no one knew if they would ever see her again. The silence of the earth had become Barbara's reality. Each breath was a fight. Each second, an eternity. The once familiar world above was now only a distant memory. The weight of the dirt that pressed down on her had become a constant reminder of her fragile existence. As the hours wore on, Barbara's mind wandered, but not to pleasant places. Her body was weak, her spirit strained. With every passing moment, it became harder to hold on to hope. In the suffocating darkness, time slipped away, indistinguishable from the cold, unyielding walls around her. She'd been buried alive, and as each second passed, she grew more uncertain that anyone would find her. Her thoughts, once clear, were now clouded by the drugged water and fever that clung to her like a vice. But the fear, the unrelenting terror, kept her aware enough to remember one thing: survival. Minutes seemed like hours, and hours felt like days. In the box, she was alone with her thoughts, with her fear. She counted. The only thing that gave her any semblance of control was the rhythm of counting, the slow, deliberate counting of seconds, trying to keep track of time that felt almost non-existent. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3. But even that rhythm began to break down, as the air became thicker, more difficult to breathe. Her throat burned with each shallow gasp. Each breath, a reminder that she was running out of air. Her body was growing weaker, but the only thing she could focus on was the flickering light above her, the dim, weak beam of the battery-powered light the kidnappers had left behind. It felt like a beacon. A fragile thread of hope that refused to let her slip into complete despair. Somewhere outside of the box, she knew that the clock was ticking. Time was passing, but would anyone be there in time? Or would the kidnappers carry out their grim promise? Would the world outside continue to turn, oblivious to her suffering? Then, finally, the kidnappers made another move. A second ransom drop. A new location. A new set of instructions. But this time, the FBI was ready. They knew that failure was no longer an option. The first attempt to retrieve the ransom had fallen apart when the police were too close, and the kidnappers vanished before the exchange could happen. Now, with Barbara still trapped beneath the earth, the stakes were even higher. The FBI agents followed the kidnappers' instructions with precision. A plan was set in motion. The money was gathered, carefully counted, packed into a case, and the exchange location was marked. This time, though, the FBI had learned from their earlier misstep. They would not be too obvious. They would not let the kidnappers slip away again. The tension was palpable. Every agent was on edge. They were prepared for anything. Surveillance teams, positioned in the area, monitored the drop site. Police radios crackled with urgent voices, directing agents in real time. The sound of police chatter filled the air, a mix of anticipation and dread. The authorities waited for the signal that the drop had been made, that the ransom was now in the hands of the kidnappers. Barbara, meanwhile, was counting the minutes in her prison. As the time passed, she struggled to keep her mind from slipping. She forced herself to count, to focus on the simple act of keeping track of time, though each passing minute made the air thinner and the darkness deeper. She counted until the numbers blurred, until the air in her tiny space felt more like liquid than gas. She thought of her mother. She thought of the life she had left behind. And most of all, she thought of the possibility, just the smallest possibility, that someone might be out there, trying to find her. Her mind clung to that thread, even though she knew every moment spent in the dark was another moment stolen from her life. The FBI, relentless in their pursuit, had followed the trail to a man named Gary Christ. A criminal with a long history, Christ's name had come up during the investigation, whispered in the corners of their findings. The agents were focused on him now, knowing he held the key to Barbara's fate. They tracked him down with the tenacity of professionals who had no time to waste. Every lead, every shred of evidence, no matter how small, was followed until it led them to an isolated area, distant from the usual hustle and bustle. It was desolate. Remote. The agents arrived, a tense, silent unit, their hearts racing as they prepared to uncover what they hoped would be the end of this nightmare. Shovels in hand, they began to dig, desperately scraping away the earth. Every shovel of dirt thrown aside felt like an eternity. Time was their enemy. They couldn't afford to waste another second. Every moment of delay meant the risk of Barbara suffocating in her prison, forever. And then, finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the shovels hit something hard. A distinct, hollow thud. A fiberglass coffin. There was no hesitation now. The agents moved with precision. Their hands tore at the dirt with renewed energy. A sense of urgency heightened by the fear that Barbara's time was running out. The lid of the coffin was wrenched open, and there she was, Barbara, pale, disoriented, and gasping for air. It had been over 83 hours. A gasp of fresh air filled her lungs. She could hardly comprehend it. She had been pulled from the grave, from the place where death seemed inevitable. Her body was weak, trembling with exhaustion, but the relief was overwhelming. She had been found. The agents surrounded her, lifting her from the earth, holding her steady as they helped her to her feet. The rescue was complete, but the questions, the emotions, would take much longer to process. Barbara's first words, barely more than a whisper, were a plea. "Where's my mother?" The nightmare was over for her. But for Jane Mackle, Barbara's mother, the nightmare was just beginning. Would her daughter be okay? How much of this experience would haunt Barbara for the rest of her life? The agents helped Barbara to safety, but the world she had known, her life, her family, had been altered forever. The trauma of what she had endured, the isolation, the near-death experience, would remain with her long after she had been rescued. The rescue was a victory, but it was one that came with a heavy price. A price that no one would be able to truly measure. And as Barbara emerged from the earth, gasping for breath, she stepped back into a world that had continued to spin without her, unaware of the nightmare that had unfolded beneath their feet. The light had returned. But for Barbara, the shadows would remain. The nightmare was far from over. The hunt for the kidnappers was relentless, and while Barbara Mackle had been freed from her grave, the men who had buried her alive were still free, still out there, still a threat. But justice was closing in. It was in the small, unassuming streets of Florida that Gary Christ's escape came to an abrupt halt. An alert came through the police radio. A tip, a lead. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. A car chase ensued, a high-speed pursuit through winding roads. Gary Christ, the man who had masterminded the abduction, was on the run. But he didn't run for long. Police closed in. A squad car pulled up beside his vehicle, forcing it off the road. Christ was caught. His capture was swift, but the weight of his crimes followed him every step of the way. This wasn't just about a kidnapping anymore. The world now knew the depth of his cruelty, and the FBI was closing in. But even as Christ was dragged away, another shadow loomed. Ruth Eisman Shear, the woman who had worked alongside him, was nowhere to be found. She had escaped. For weeks, Ruth remained elusive, slipping through the grasp of authorities, until finally, after much manhunt and careful maneuvering, she was captured. Her capture would make history. Ruth Eisman Shear was the first woman to be placed on the FBI's most wanted list. Her cold, calculating demeanor had earned her a spot alongside some of the most notorious criminals in America. The two of them, the masterminds behind Barbara's abduction, were now in custody. But the story didn't end with their capture. Archival footage plays in the background, courtroom sketches, the sound of gavel striking, the solemn faces of judges. The world watched as both Christ and Iceman Shear faced trial. Their fate, now sealed by their own actions, was a moment of justice long awaited. For Barbara. For her family. For all those who had been left in the wake of their horrifying crime. The courtroom drama was over, but what came after the trial? What did life look like for Barbara once the cameras had turned off and the world had moved on? For Barbara Mackall, life after the abduction would never be the same. The trauma she had endured left scars that couldn't be seen but would follow her for years to come. The world wanted her story, but she chose to live in private, away from the spotlight. In interviews, she spoke of the impact of the kidnapping on her life, how the trauma, the fear, and the isolation had shaped her. Barbara chose to live a life far from the public eye, focusing on her family, her healing, and finding peace in a world that had once seemed so unkind. But for Gary Christ, the life he had known would be filled with more than just courtrooms and police stations. After his capture, Christ's life spiraled further into darkness. He would eventually become embroiled in yet another scandal, this time in the form of medical fraud. The man who had once held the life of a young woman in his hands now faced accusations of running a fraudulent medical scheme. His criminal history would follow him, but it was clear, no matter how far he ran, his past was never going to be far behind. As for Ruth Iceman Shear, the FBI did not waste time in bringing her to justice. After her capture, she was deported to Honduras, a country she called home but had fled from in search of a life that had led her down a dark and dangerous path. In the years that followed, Ruth would fade from the public eye, but her place in criminal history had already been cemented. Two criminals, their lives irrevocably altered by their actions. Two victims, Barbara, who had survived, and the nation, which had watched in horror as this dark chapter unfolded. For Barbara, there was no going back to the life she once knew. The road ahead was uncertain, but she had survived the unimaginable. And for the kidnappers, there was no escape. Their capture marked the end of one of the most chilling crimes in American history. Justice, however delayed, had found them. Barbara Mackall's ordeal is a story that remains etched in history. For over 83 hours, she was trapped underground, buried alive, with nothing but the dim glow of a battery-powered light and the sound of her own breathing to keep her company. Her resilience, her will to survive, and the strength she found deep within herself are nothing short of extraordinary. Against all odds, she clung to life, not knowing if she would see the light of day again. It was the kind of survival that defied belief. As the years passed, experts would reflect on how her case changed the way law enforcement approached kidnapping cases. The FBI's relentless pursuit of justice, their tireless efforts to track down her abductors, became a benchmark for how such cases would be handled in the future. The lessons learned from the tragic events of that time would go on to shape investigative techniques, influence policies, and increase awareness of the tactics used by criminals. The Mackall case made it clear that no case, no matter how complex, would go unsolved. The image of Barbara's burial box, now recovered and preserved, remains a haunting reminder of the terror she faced. The fiberglass shell, once a coffin of despair, now serves as a symbol of survival. It is a testament to the human spirit, how it can endure even when the odds seem insurmountable. In the end, Barbara's story is not just one of terror and suffering. It is a story of strength, of resilience, and of survival. A story that will never be forgotten. A story that stands as a reminder of the indomitable power of the human will to live.
If this story captivated you, don't miss the next one. Subscribe to Buried Secret and become part of our journey through the world's most gripping true crime cases. We explore stories that challenge everything we know about fear, mystery, and the human spirit. Be sure to click the notification bell so you're always the first to see when we drop our next video. We want to hear your thoughts. What part of Barbara's story impacted you the most? Drop your comments below and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching, and remember, secrets don't stay buried forever.